Okay, we're ready to move on and get into some slightly more sophisticated aspects of Flexbox. In this exercise, we're going to talk about main axis spacing and alignment. So we know what the main axis is. It can be either horizontal or vertical, and we know what the cross axis is. He's determined by the main axis. He runs perpendicular to the main axis, as we already know. So we're going to talk about how we can space and align the child elements along the main axis. Now, before we really get into this, I want to make you aware of just a very minor change that I've made here. All I did is I changed the background color on my parent container. I wanted a greater contrast between the parent container itself and the child elements to help you distinguish for yourself visually here what's what. So my parent container now has this light gray background as determined by the Gainsborough setting here, or value that I've used for background. Okay, so that's it. Okay, now on to main axis spacing and alignment. I don't know how you want to think of this, but basically what we're going to do is we're going to take all of our child elements and figure out how to align them within the parent container, or perhaps how to space them apart inside the parent container. I'm a Photoshop and Illustrator user, so I think of this in terms of aligning objects or distributing objects apart. You could think of it in those terms, or you could think of it in terms of taking the overall parent container itself, depending on how wide it might be, and what you want to do with all the extra space that's left over inside the parent container that isn't occupied by child elements. You could think of it in those terms. But I think instead of trying to verbally explain to you what we want to try and achieve here, I'm going to show you using some code. So to pull this off, to space or align or distribute, or however you want to think of it, the child elements inside the parent container, we're going to be using a Flexbox CSS property called justify content. And here's how it goes. We're going to grab our parent container, all right? I'm going to make sure that my parent container does not have a width set on him, which he doesn't. So again, he's spanning across the entire available space inside my browser window. Okay, I'm still on FlexFlow row and wrap, okay, as we had left off in the previous exercise, so no change there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to throw on this new property right on the end of my parent ID selector. He's going to look like this. Justify -content, like so, full colon space. And we have a whole bunch of values that we can use with this guy. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to set this guy to flex-start. Okay. Now, before I save and refresh, I want to remind you very gently here that our main axis right now is horizontal, as being determined by the row value inside the FlexFlow shorthand property. Okay, so we're running horizontal here. So I'm going to say justify content flex start. I'm going to save up my work, head back to the browser, refresh, Control Command R, and nothing changes here. This is because the flex start value is actually our default value. What this does, and this is important if you're taking notes here, what this does is it tells all the flex items to group or align themselves over to the starting point of the parent container. Because we're set to a horizontal row, the starting point is way over here on the left-hand side. So all of my child elements are ganged over onto the left-hand side. Think of it as left-aligning text, if you want to use that example. That's an example that we can all understand. Left-align text. So what happens to all the extra space on a page when we left-align text? Well, the extra space is left over on the right-hand side of the page. And that's exactly what happens here in Flexbox. The extra space winds up over on the right-hand side of our parent container. Now, as you might guess, we've got Flex Start, but we've also got Flex End. And I'm going to save my code here and back to the browser and refresh. And this is the opposite of Flex Start. Now all my Flex items are ganged up or aligned, however you want to think of it, over on the right-hand side of the parent container, all the empty space now appearing over on the left-hand side. Okay? So we've got Flex Start. This is the default, which moves all the child Flex items to the starting point of the parent Flex container, and any space that's left over is going to sit on the parent container's right-hand side. We've got Flex End, which we're looking at right here. This is the opposite again of Flex Start. All the child Flex items move to the end of the parent container, and any extra space now, of course, appears on the right. This is like right-aligned text, again, if you want to think of it like that. What else can we do? How about this? Well, I'm going to go justify content, and then I'm going to say center, like so. You understand the concept of center-aligned text? I certainly do as well, and that's exactly what we're going to get here. And now we're getting somewhere very interesting when we're thinking in terms of building web layouts. So now I have all of my Flex items. It doesn't matter how many we have. 3 of them, 6 of them, 9 of them, 15 of them. It doesn't matter. They're all going to center align automatically inside the parent container. No need to use floats or auto margins or any of that stuff that we've used before. Now the space that's left over inside the parent container is divided equally on the left and right sides. Awesome. Okay, so we're really getting somewhere here. Now, I've got 2 more values that I want to show you, and I hope you're enjoying this. And these 2 are kind of wacky. They're kind of interesting. But again, I know kind of the, what's the word I'm thinking of? Kind of the cross-reference to the world that I come from, which is graphic design. I know where this references to in an application like Photoshop or Illustrator, but here it's not called the same thing in Flexbox. What I'm talking about here is something called space-between. Go ahead and set your justify content value to space between if you would, okay? And let's save up our work and head back and refresh. We now get this. Now, what's happened here, and this is really interesting, and again, you'll want to jot this down in your notes. The very first child element is pushed over to the parent container's starting point, okay? Safe enough. Of course, all my widths on the child elements are being respected as well. Way over on the right-hand side, the last child element is pushed all the way over to the parent container's ending point, okay, on that main axis, again, horizontal, okay? Now, what happens to all of the child elements that appear between the first child element and the last child element? They're equally spaced apart inside the parent container. How awesome is that? Again, it doesn't matter if we've got 3 child elements or 10 child elements or 23 child elements. It doesn't matter. The code is going to figure out the spacing automatically for us even when things begin flexing, as we're seeing here. Okay, isn't that awesome stuff? So there you go. We're really getting somewhere now. This is wonderful stuff for building, again, mobile or responsive layouts. I've got one more here for you that I want to show you. We saw space between. There's also space around. Now, this guy is a little wacky. I don't know if I would ever actually use this guy or a layout would ever call for something like this, but let's check this guy out. Space around. Go ahead and save your code. Head back to your browser and refresh. Now, space around looks very similar to space between, doesn't it? Except what happens here is you'll notice that the first child element and the last child element have a little bit of space before them over on the far left-hand side and a little bit of space after them way over on the right-hand side. So what happens is the amount of space between each of the child elements here gets divided in 2 and dropped before the first child element and after the last child element. Kind of neat, kind of cool. I don't know if I'd ever actually use it though. So anyway, that's space around. Very similar again to space between. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to pause the video and experiment a little bit with these values that we've seen. Again, it's justify content. I'll flip back to my code here. It's all about the justify content property. And the values that we saw, once again, were flex start, flex end, center, space between, and space around. And when you're finished kind of monkeying around, what I'm going to show you in the next exercise is how to use these same values, but in a vertical layout rather than in a horizontal layout. All right, have some fun, and I'll see you in a minute.